Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and today we have a crazy way to counterattack the King's Gambit. King's Gambit being my favorite opening in chess, starts with the move e4, e5, and then f4, and then we get to the crazy move, and that is f5. Hopefully after this video, if you like playing the King's Gambit, you'll have a better understanding of how to attack this line if you see it. If you're black and you're crazy enough, you may just want to try it if you ever see your opponent play the King's Gambit. There's a lot of different traps you can play in this, and if your opponent's not ready for it, it could catch them off guard. So hopefully, guys, enjoy this video. I have a lot of other videos on the King's Gambit on all the variations that you could see, so definitely check those out as well. But one of the first traps that you'll see in this opening is they may not know how to take back correctly, and they may look at this and say, yeah, I was already going to give up my f pawn here, so I'll go ahead and take your center pawn here on e5. That would be a big mistake, and not everyone's going to fall for that, obviously, but it's always good to know what you should do if your opponents do fall for a trap or make a mistake in a chess game. From here, black plays the move queen to h4. You can already see what we are attacking here. After check, if they play g3, then we're going to be forking their rook here on h1. So it doesn't matter how they really block this. We're going to take the rook here on h1. If they don't play pawn to g3, not a lot of other great options. King to e2, queen e4 check, get the bishop involved into the game. Maybe king over here to g3, check with the pawn. If they don't, maybe they play d4 check, but then when they play the king, we come back here with bishop to e5 check as well. So at the end of the day, it's going to be extremely bad if they take with this pawn here on e5. Now, more than likely, they will take with their other pawn, which they should. So that's what we're going to be looking at mostly in this video, is if they take with their pawn here on f5. Can't bring our queen down here to h4. You can see they solidified this pawn chain right here, and we can't come over check their king at all. So that is not the move that we're going to be playing. Instead, we're going to be playing the move queen to e7. Now you could look at this position and say there's an in-between move that you could make. So instead of queen to e7, you could play queen to h4 check, essentially forcing g3 and then the move queen to e7. You have the same position but the pawn here on g3. Now this may look better for black, but I think it's better not to play that in-between move, and I'll show you why. Because after the move queen to e7, one of the threats that you have is your opponent taking here on e5, because they may think that you could just take here. If you look at this board, they're up 2 pawns of material. You haven't taken any material. They've just gobbled up pawns here that you could take with your queen here on e5, and they could play bishop here to e2, or potentially their queen to e2, so you can't just take here. Your queen is now pinned. They can exchange material off pretty easily here. Even if you were to exchange right here, your white's up in material, and they may feel like this is a very good game that they have. Unfortunately for white, that's not how black is going to take. They're not going to come here to e5 and check. Black's going to come here to h4 check, and then same as before, we see pawn to g3. Queen swings over here to e4, and you can already see that the rook is going to fall here on h1. So that's a little bit different than if we started with that in-between move and played queen to h4. They play g3, stopping that. Queen comes back here to e7, and if they take, we don't have that option of coming here to h4. It is stopped by the pawn here on g3. So that's why I wouldn't play the in-between move. As soon as they play pawn takes here on f5, I would just go ahead and play queen to e7. All right, so let's look at some of the options that you could see after the move queen to e7. One of the first logical moves is knight to f3. Very common line in the King's Gambit, pretty much in all chess, to bring your knight here to f3. Develops another piece, attacks this square here on e5, and also prepares, once the light square bishop get involved, to castle on the king side. So I think this would be pretty common for you to see. You're going to continue with knight to c6. You want to develop as much pieces as you can in the board. And this also lays another trap, because they may look at this and say, I can just go ahead and take with my knight here, It's protected by the pawn, so maybe they take here, take here. Same thing as before. Queen takes, and they may feel that you have to exchange. You've probably seen this before now, but we don't have to take with our queen here on e5. We're going to be doing the same thing as before. So queen over here to e4. You start to recognize the pattern here. So they don't have to take with their knight, or even if we do take with our knight, they don't have to take with their pawn. They could try some other stuff. Now we are threatening mate here, so that they have to do something. They can't just play knight to c3 and try to develop material. That's mate right there. They don't have anywhere to move. This is double check. They have to move their king, and the king can't go anywhere because of the knight. So we are representing a real threat here. So they may decide, okay, instead of the pawn taking, well, I'm going to be aggressive myself. So queen down here to h4. That's not necessarily going to work, because you could just play g6 in this spot, and it doesn't really matter how they continue from here. They don't have a lot of good moves. Now, if they take this pawn here, because many times they're looking for the pawn to come down to g7 with the discovered attack, and recognizing like, hey, the pawn just can't take here because the queen can just capture this rook here on h8. But if they take with their pawn, they're going to lose again, because we're still representing that serious threat. Now, knight to d3, the only difference is the king can now come to d1, but it is going to be checkmate in 1 after knight to f2. There's no way to stop that. So definitely can't take with their pawn here on g6. They could take the knight here, but then they're just going to lose their queen. So that's really not an option. Can't bring the queen here. So really, in this spot, that they're going to be looking to take with their pawn, but that's, as we just saw, that's not going to be really good. So don't want to take with their knight right here. Another option, after we play knight to c3, they could play bishop to e2. From here, we're playing d6, solidifying the pawn chain, also opening up for this light square bishop to take the material here on f5. Remember, we gave up 2 pawns in material at the beginning if they wanted to take it. So we gave that first pawn up, and then they can always take the second pawn. But we're going to be getting that material back pretty quickly here. So if they castle on the king side, you could say bishop takes on f5, and we are even in material. If they decide now, or instead of castling, to go ahead and take that second pawn here on e5, that's fine. We could just recapture with our pawn on e5. We have the e-pawn. We can get our bishop here to f5. We can castle on the queen side. In this position, I wouldn't recommend castling on the king side. There's so much going on the king side, but definitely a good position that you have here. If they don't take with their pawn, they could see this pawn to d6, and this opens up for a pin on the knight. So they could play bishop here to b5. That's fine. Just bishop takes here on f5. So all of those are fine indeed. If instead of the bishop coming here to e2, they could also play the move pawn takes here on e5. We saw that knight taking here, probably not the best move, but they could play with their pawn taking here. And then we're just going to take with our knights after the knight takes right here. Then we're going to come up here and take with our queen. Now, if they come queen to e2, I don't really like taking yet, because they could just recapture and we don't have the best position. Instead, I recommend playing d6. This does a couple things. One is once they take, we recapture, but we have a better position because we have a central pawn here on e5. We can, on our next move, take with our bishop here on c5. So if you know there's going to be an exchange, think about the best way that you can have the setup you want, because after this exchange, you can see it's going to take 2 moves. We could play pawn to d5 to have a central pawn here, and then bishop to f5. Just much better to play something like after queen to e2, that pawn to d6. So just an option. If they don't play queen to e2, they could play bishop here to e2. That's fine. We're just continue to develop our pieces. Knight to f6, get our pawn involved into the game. Bishop here to f4. That's the strategy that we're going to be going for all the options. If they after we play the move knight to c6. Next variation that you could see is the queen comes down here to h5 check, and black really needs to play king to d8. Now, we looked at a previous example where g6 saved the day, but that was when the knight was here on e5, and we were threatening the mate with the double check here on d3. Don't have the knight there. The knight's back here on b8. So g6 is not going to cut it. After the pawn takes, yeah, we could have a discovered attack here, take material on f4, but it doesn't matter. Bishop to e2, black's going to have to play king to d8. So don't do that. If they play this queen down here to h5, just play king to d8. You're not really looking to castle on the king side anyway, so it doesn't really matter too much that you can't castle anymore. Yes, eventually you would like to castle on the queen side, which you can't do anymore, but you have king safety. You're going to be pushing forward at some point with your d-pawn. You can recapture here. You could play knight to f6, force the queen back. They will have moved their queen a couple moves. You're going to be completely fine in this position. Maybe they take with their pawn on e5. You take with your queen, bishop here to e2, knight to f6. Maybe they bring their queen back here to h4, pinning down our knight. Knight to c6 here. We already talked about get your dark square bishop involved into the game, push the pawn up here. You can attack the pawn here on f5. You can't castle, but you can still get your rook involved into the game. You have this open file here on the e file, this f file as well. And you can see from white's standpoint, they're going to need to get their knight involved into the game. We have both of our knights involved into the game. Their dark square bishop is not involved into the game, and their king is still in the center of the board. And it's going to be pretty dangerous for them to try to castle on the king side as well. It's going to take quite a few moves to castle on the queen side. So you still have a lot of attacks going on here. And once we take this material back on f5, we're still going to be even in material. The last variation we are going to look at is if the knight comes to c3. We're going to mirror that with our own knight to c6. Slight difference is that in this spot, if they play pawn to e5, we can't play our normal, hey, you took here, we're going to play queen to h4, because after g3, queen to e4, forking the rook here, they just take our queen. So don't do that. That would be a huge blunder in chess. So instead of the queen coming here to h4, we're just going to take with our queen here on e5. If they play bishop, that's fine. Then knight to d4 puts a lot of pressure on our opponents. You know, maybe they play knight to f3, and then knight takes, pawn captures, and then we can either take with our queen here on f5, and you can see their king side's completely blown up. You could play bishop here to c5. So you have a lot of options. Maybe instead of knight to f3, they play d3, but you can see that they just don't have a lot of great squares. Knight to f6, get our other knight involved into the game. You can get your bishop here to b4. How do they really continue in this spot that we just block off so many of the critical squares that they want to go to? Instead of bishop here to e2, same thing as before. They could play queen to e2, and we could play pawn d6. So a lot of different options, but that is some crazy opening in the King's Gambit. So if you meet the King's Gambit, you want to try it yourself, go ahead and play this f5. Let me know what you guys think. And, you know, if you play it from white's standpoint as well, make sure that you know how to play. Definitely don't be capturing here on the e5 square. If you like this video, if you like the King's Gambit or other Gambits and you like these videos, if you wouldn't mind pressing that like button. And also, if you try out this Gambit, let me know how it goes in the comments, or if there's other videos that you would like to see. Most of the videos I make are recommendations from people, either in the comments or via email that people are sending to me. So love the suggestions, keep those coming. Or if you have other variations of your favorite opening and you say, hey, can you go through this variation as well? Definitely make those videos for you guys. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.